All right, let's go ahead and dive in. Thank you all for joining us for today's presentation on the EB2 National Interest Waiver. My name is Dustin Saldarriaga, and I'm a senior associate with Scott Legal PC in New York City. I'm joined today by my colleague, Jie Huang, who has extensive experience preparing EB2 National Interest Waiver petitions. So we are very fortunate to have Jie here to speak with us and answer any questions you all have. Um, Let me give you a little bit of background information before we dive in. The first thing is that our firm is a business immigration law firm, although I will note we do handle the full spectrum of U.S. immigration law. One of the things that does set us apart is that we have personally navigated the immigration process, and that really does inform the way that we work with our clients. Our founder, Ian Scott, founded the firm on an E2 visa after navigating the F1, the H1B, the TN visa, and a number of our attorneys have also personally navigated the process. So again, that really does impact how we work with our clients. Again, though, we do handle family immigration, we handle temporary visas. So whatever immigration related questions you have, we do hope that you'll reach out to us. Schedule a consultation. After this webinar, we will send you an email where you can find a link to schedule a consultation. You'll also find a comprehensive guide on the National Interest Waiver, as well as a link to our YouTube channel where we will post the full length recording of our webinar. We take a lot of pride in our YouTube channel. We post not only full-length webinars, but also shorter videos on a variety of immigration topics. So please do check that out. It is a great resource. The other resource we have that, again, you'll find in this email that we'll send to you is our blog on our website. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of posts on our blog, again, covering the full spectrum of U.S. immigration. So we do hope that you'll find that helpful. If you have any questions during our presentation, please do ask through either the Q&A function on Zoom or the chat function. I will be monitoring those throughout the presentation. We will probably be saving questions for the end, but don't hesitate to send in your questions whenever they occur to you, and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. I will be joining again for the second half of the presentation, but for now, I'll go ahead and pass it off to GA to talk with you about the National Interest Waiver.
All right. Thank you so much, Dustin, for the introduction, and thanks, welcome all for being here today. All right, so now let's go over the basics of what is really a national interest waiver. What is an NIW? So to provide an overview, the EB2 NIW is a green card option that can be available when the government concludes that you are coming to the United States to do something that is in the national interest. So the way to understand it is that the EB2 NIW is a subset of the EB2 employment-based green card category, which is a larger green card category, which encompasses the usual way that you would get a green card with employment, which is to have a U.S. company sponsor you, right, with a job offer, a permanent job offer. And then what the U.S. company is usually required to do is to test the U.S. labor market to see if there is any other U.S., employee, potential employee who can fill your job and is qualified and available for that job before the U.S. company can offer this job to the foreign national and sponsor the foreign national for a green card. Now, that's the ordinary process. It's called the PERM or the labor certification process. And, it is quite a time-consuming and complicated process. And you can really push back, the timeline for a green card significantly for foreign nationals. However, the EB2 NIW, if you can show that your work is in the national interest as the way that the government defines it, then you can be exempt. You can apply to be exempt from this requirement, such that you don't need a U.S. company to sponsor you. You don't need a U.S. job offer. No U.S. company needs to go through the time-consuming labor certification process. Instead, the foreign national can be their own driver of the petition. So you're allowed to what is called self-petition for a green card. And there are not a lot of categories that allow this, but the EB2 NIW is one that allows this. And the EB1A, the green card for extraordinary ability individuals, is also another category that allows this. But that is to say that having the ability to self-petition is indeed a very significant advantage in the green card process that can, really speed up the trajectory for applicants. Now, because of this advantage that's given to EB2 and IW applicants, there is a much higher bar to meet to show that your work is indeed in the national interest. You need to show more than just the fact that you will be coming into the United States to fill a job, because that is what you would go through. You would go through the labor certification process for. So, in order to prove to the government that you are, eligible for an exemption from the ordinary requirement, you need to show why your work is, special in a way, right? And we will go in further detail on how really to prove that that your work is special. So the NIW has a three-requirement test, a three-prong test on how to prove national interest based on a recent case from 2016. It's called Matter of Dinosaur. And in general, you need to show that your proposed endeavor itself will have substantial merit and national importance. You yourself will be well positioned to advance this endeavor, and that on balance, it will benefit the United States to exempt, the applicant from the ordinary requirements of a labor certification. But not only do you need to meet that three-prong test promulgated by Matter of Dinosaur, you also need to show the government that you meet the EB2 threshold requirement, which is, relevant for all EB2 based employment based petitions. And we'll go on to the next slides and provide a little bit more detail on that. But the way to meet the EB2 threshold is by showing that you have a master's degree in your field, or a bachelor's degree plus 5 years. That's also considered equivalent of a master's degree, or that you have exceptional ability in the sciences, arts, or business. And we'll just go back to the previous slide and go over the remaining bullet points before moving on. So, as we mentioned before, one thing to note is that you do not need an employer to apply for a green card under the EB2 NIW channel. And the waiver relates to the EB2 requirement to prove that the employer cannot find a qualified U.S. worker, which is the perm labor certification requirement. But the challenge for the NIW is proving why your case merits an exemption from this ordinary requirement in the national interest. And one thing to note, very important point to note before we move on to the next slide, is that applicants in any field can apply for the EB2 NIW. The NIW is not just related to the STEM applicants. It is not just related to researchers. In fact, many entrepreneurs have successfully applied for the NIW, and the field in which the entrepreneur has been developing their businesses, in our experience, has really run the gamut. You can apply with a graphic design firm. You can apply with, even a martial arts gym, right? There are many success stories where you were able to, applicants in many different diverse fields have been able to prove that their specific endeavor was in the national interest because of what they did to the field, because of the innovations that they were able to show that they were making to the field that would really, change the way that things are done in their particular field. So what is really important in the NIW analysis is what is your specific proposed endeavor and what is its prospective impact on that particular field. And what is less important is what is your field, right? And a good example of this is that we've been hearing, so a myth, right? A very popular myth that if you are a pilot, you would be, able to get the NIW because the US has a shortage of pilots. Now, that has been an argument that has been floating around the internet. We've seen many people who, schedule consultations talk about this, but it is really a myth. And the reason why it is a myth is because it is not the applicant's field that is important, but what is important is the applicant's proposed endeavor. So if you are a pilot who is at the cutting edge of the piloting, field, and if you're, developing a new technology that will make piloting more, efficient or advanced than existing solutions, then yeah, maybe you can apply, in that field. But just because you're a pilot and just because you're proposing to come to the United States to work as a pilot, will you get a green card under the NIW? The answer actually is no. And we're happy to, help debunk all of these myths as they may come by. Yeah, so we'll move on to the next slide now. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more detail about the threshold requirements. Either you must show that you have an advanced degree, which is defined as a master's degree or higher, so a PhD, for example. Even, degrees like an MD, like a medical doctor, or a JD, a Juris Doctor. They're not, they're a little different from, masters, but they still count as an advanced degree because you need a bachelor's in order to qualify for admission for those types of programs. If you don't have a master's degree in your field, but if you have a bachelor's degree in your field, plus if you can show 5 years of post-baccalaureate progressive work experience in the profession, and progressive work experience is defined as, you know, full-time work, but also work where your responsibilities and job duties change in complexity over time, and it must increase in complexity and responsibility over time. So if you started off as a junior engineer and then you became a senior engineer and then maybe a principal engineer at the end, that kind of upward trajectory in the 5 years is what the government is looking for if you're trying to meet the threshold with a bachelor's and 5 years of experience. So it is very important to get detailed letters confirming your employment from your previous employers on, company letterhead if you're going that route. So it is very important not only to prove that you have the degree by, showing the diploma, and if it is a foreign degree, you also need to provide a U.S. degree equivalency report from an agency that does such evaluations. But you also need that, proof of work experience if you're trying to meet this threshold. The other way to meet this threshold, if you don't have a bachelor's, if you don't have a master's, if that's, or if you don't have the 5 years work experience, you may try looking into whether you can prove that you have exceptional ability in the sciences, arts, or business. And the way to prove this is showing at least 3 out of the 7 evidentiary criteria that's listed here, such as if you have 10 years of full-time experience in your occupation, if you, have commanded a high salary in your field, if you have licenses and, you have membership in some professional associations. But importantly, if you can show that you've been recognized for your achievements by peers, by relevant professional associations, by government agencies, things like that, maybe it's, through awards, or maybe it's through recommendation letters that show that you're someone who's, been recognized. The totality of the evidence must be able to show that you're someone who's operating at a level that is significantly above what is ordinarily encountered in the field. So the volume and quality of the evidence must show that you're kind of, someone who's a little bit exceptional. Now, you don't need to show that you're extraordinary, like the EB1A context, but, and you can see, from the types of evidence that you need to provide, it's less stringent than what you would need for an EB1A, but you still need to show that you're someone who's operating at a level significantly above what is ordinarily encountered. So there must be some sort of distinction that you'll be able to prove to meet the EB2 under this channel. Okay, so now let's shift gears a little bit and dive into a little bit more detail on the DANISR test, which is really the principal, challenge that EB2 NIW applicant must overcome to, be approved for the green card petition. So let's start with the first prong of the DANISR test, which is that the applicant's proposed endeavor has substantial merit and national importance. And really, let's unpack what that means. So step one in the NIW process is to clearly define the endeavor itself. And it is important to keep in mind that the applicant must present a specific project or goal that goes beyond simply working in an occupation. So let's say you are an AI engineer. You can't just provide a proposed endeavor that says, I'm an AI engineer. I'm going to search for a job in the US and I'm going to provide AI engineering services to a US company. If that's it, then unfortunately, the government is not going to approve the NIW because what they're going to say is that there is no proposed endeavor. What is the plan of what you're going to do in that occupation. There's no detail other than the fact that you're going to do a job search. But doing a job search, you need to do that through getting a job offer, right? Remember the perm process that I talked about earlier, where you need a company to sponsor you and things like that? If your proposed endeavor is just to work at a job, then the government is going to think, well, this is not an NIW case. This is what it should be, a perm case. You should go and get a, US employer to sponsor you. So it is very important to provide a more specific plan on what you're planning to do. And the important thing about that is the government wants to know what is the prospective impact of that particular project that you're doing, what particular area that you're focusing on. So for example, if you're an AI engineer, and if you find that existing ways to train models is very inefficient, if you feel that, you can do something else, you're developing a new technology, a new training methodology that will speed up, the speed and, resources that goes into training an AI model from, let's say, months to days, a very, groundbreaking thing that you're building, right? That proposal, that project is what the government wants to hear about. And if you can show like things like, oh, in the past, I've done similar research and I've, even authored patents, for new technology that has been cited by other people, or if you presented at an industry conference about, AI training and, some ways that you can improve upon, existing approaches, those kind of evidences can show the government that what you will be doing in the future on even improving even further this technology will actually have a broader impact to the field because other experts will look at your work and, get ideas. If it's a patented technology that you're developing, other companies can license the patent and, use those, technologies to help their own processes. So that's how you start building the case for national importance. Because when we talk about national importance, the government wants to know what is the prospective impact and does it go beyond just generating a private benefit to one private employer, or does it benefit the field as a whole? Does it benefit society as a whole? Does it benefit, the US competency in terms of technological advancement as a whole? Because your work, has greater impact than, just, helping the bottom line of one company. So that's the way that you want to start thinking about your proposed endeavor. So to go through the specific examples, right? Endeavors that have national or even global implications within a field, such as improved manufacturing processes, medical advances. Even if your medical research is about one particular disease and one part of a disease and developing a new treatment, it can have, a broad impact on public health if you're able to, make treatments more effective, right? Really change the lives of people who, receive your treatment. And those kinds of broad impact, to the society and to the country is what the government is looking for. Or substantial positive economic effects, right? Especially if you are designing a project that is planning to boost the economic performance of an underdeveloped region, right? A rural area or a remote area, right? If you're, pulling in, millions of dollars in investment, and if you're, developing this project to revitalize an industry and creating hundreds of jobs, yeah, that can definitely seem like a broad impact to the society and to national interest in the eyes of the government. So definitely we want to look at what is the prospective impact of your endeavor. Substantial merit. So there is a little bit of a difference between substantial merit and national importance. And substantial merit is easier to meet because if you're, driving forward a project that will, increase the, welfare or benefit of a particular area, you can argue that there is substantial merit to that particular project. But for national importance, the impact must be broad, right? Um, and you don't need to geographically show that the impact will reach every single state. You don't need to do that anymore. But the impact must be at least go beyond one's immediate employer. The impact must go at least beyond one's immediate clients if you're an entrepreneur. So if you're, um, building a I don't know, a bakery, right? And if your bread will positively impact the people who come in and, eat your bread, that's kind of a more of a localized benefit that is only limited to your immediate clientele, right? And that kind of endeavor, the government is going to think, well, I'm really not seeing the broader impact that the NIW was really designed for. By contrast, and we discussed about improved manufacturing processes, right? If it's a new technology that can be licensed out to other companies as well, or if you're providing a model of a best practices that can really spark similar innovation across the industry through, media features or otherwise, then you can, maybe show a broader impact that will help the entire industry move forward to the future direction. So that's the kind of distinction that we're looking for. Job shortage issues in the United States do not mean that the profession rises to the level of national importance. We've already discussed in previous slides about the pilot issue. Just the fact that the US has a shortage of pilots does not mean that every single pilot is going to be approved for a green card under the EB2 NIW program. Similarly, relevant measures for national importance is who will benefit from your work. So in terms of teaching endeavors, teachers have a very difficult time with EB2 NIW petitions because the government takes the position that teaching activities only tend to benefit the immediate students. And it does not tend to, uh, impact the advancement of the field as a whole if you're not, otherwise, having more thought leadership to other experts in your field, right? So if you're teaching people who are beginners who don't know much about the project, like you're helping your immediate students, but you're not really doing much further than that. So the nature of your endeavor is also very important when you're making the argument of national importance. There has been a case where there was a PhD, professor with a PhD in a particular area who made an argument that they're going to be teaching but also doing research. And when the government was looking at national importance, they actually separated out those endeavors and say, hey, the research part of the endeavor may have broader importance to the field because it's affecting scientific knowledge and the advancement of scientific knowledge for the field as a whole. But the teaching part of the professor's activities is actually not going to meet the national importance standard because only their students are going to benefit from that activity. So that's a very important example to keep in mind, right? How you present your proposed endeavor will also impact how the government thinks of the prospective impact of your endeavor. All right, so the second part of the Danaher test is showing that the applicant is well positioned to advance the endeavor. And for this, the focus is really on the individual. So you want to talk about your background, including your experience in education. You want to be able to describe a track record of success or influence in the field. So if you've done similar projects that are analogous to what you say that you will be doing in the United States, even in your home country, right? So if you've received well reception, if your work was received well in your home country, you can use examples from your previous projects to support the fact that your future projects in the US will also be successful. So you want to really provide a portfolio of, some of the strongest projects that you've done, some of the strongest, examples of achievements from before that will, convince the government that of the impact of your future work as well. Patents and intellectual property are usually very helpful. And it also, is relevant to providing support for prong one as well, right? So if you've done, R&D in the past, and if your work has been used by others, if you publish intellectual property in the form of, maybe journal articles, or if you've made presentations in conferences, that's always, an example of thought leadership. And if you can show that you've affected, best practices in your field before, then the government can think, oh yeah, this person will also, if they continue doing what they're doing, will contribute to advancing best practices for the field more broadly in the US as well. So those kinds of thought leadership is always helpful when we're looking at an NIW case. Another thing to note is how far along is your endeavor, right? So it in rare cases, it is rare when the government will approve an NIW just based on a plan which is just on paper, right? So you want to show them that even if you're, developing a new startup that's groundbreaking with a groundbreaking idea, ideally you would want to show that you have already received expressions of interest from US actors on that project, that you're proposing, right? So maybe you have a partnership with a university, who want to, use some of your research for their own papers, right? So things like that. Or if you're an entrepreneur and if you've obtained admission to an accelerator or an incubator, or receive venture capital funding, right? That's kind of U.S. entities showing interest in your work and showing and even providing validation of the transformative potential of your work. So those kinds of evidences of traction from U.S. industry actors can be very helpful, especially if some of the support that you can get are from government-related entities. So if you're, someone who's developing an agriculture-related, startup, and if you can get a letter of intent from or a letter of support from, you know, the U.S. Department of Agriculture or a sub agency within, the USDA, supporting your project and supporting the potential impact of your project and how it can benefit the United States, that can be very, very powerful in supporting your case for the NIW. Um, so yeah, there are a variety of evidences that you can, harness depending on your circumstances, on, proving national importance and well positioned. There is a little bit of creative room there. There is no one way, there is no cookie cutter way to approach this, but the more evidence that you can provide and the more relevant the evidence are, the better your case will be, and the more you can strengthen the possibility of success. If you are an entrepreneur and if you've been growing the business, maybe on a different visa, like if you're on an E2 visa and if you've spent several years developing the business, evidence of growth that you've produced to date can also be helpful. And those can be, described by tax returns showing a pattern of growth of revenues, and even, forms W-2 showing that you've hired a high number of employees. All of those things can be very helpful for the government in assessing whether you're well positioned to advance the endeavor. Contracts are also a good example. If you have, secured contract with major, U.S. industry actors, if you're, an AI engineering firm and if you have a contract with Google, for example, that already shows that, your, can we go back to the, yeah, um, that already shows that you've had, traction from the industry, and that you've been able to develop the business to that stage where you would get that traction. So that can be very helpful. Finally, the third, let's move on now to the third prong of the Danaher test, which is that the government is asking for a showing that on balance, it would be beneficial to the United States to waive the requirements of a job offer and thus of a labor certification for your particular case. You can use some of the extraordinary ability considerations if you have them, like if you've been featured in media, major media, if you've been invited to judge the work of others. You can use some of those evidences to go to support that. You can reuse evidence that was used to support prong 1 and 2. So you can maybe point to the broad systemic impact that your work can make to the field, or you can, identify what are some areas where your skills are so specialized and so advanced that it would not be easy to replace it with just another US person with minimum credentials. So you can use some of the prong 2 well-positioned evidence to support prong 3 as well. Um, Other notes that you can use about entrepreneurs specifically is that entrepreneurs are self-employed and the government knows this, and often they're not eligible for green cards under the traditional labor certification program because you need a US job offer from, a different company. So entrepreneurs can use the fact that it would be impractical or impossible for them to otherwise qualify for a green card to their benefit, and also show that on balance, they're going to create jobs in the United States, not taking jobs from the US labor pool. So that can also be one more thumb on the scale to help an entrepreneur petition in prong 3. All right, so I think this is the last slide that I'll go through before moving it on to Dustin. So yeah, let's just a couple more tips about how to approach national importance because that is increasingly being sort of the linchpin on the success of an NIW petition. For national importance, remember that you need to prove the importance of the individual's specific proposed endeavor, not the importance of the field or occupation the individual will be working in. So even though piloting is a very important field for the United States, not all pilots will be approved for a green card. You need to show what you will be doing in your field that will impact the field more broadly. Expert letters can be very important on, really contextualizing what the field needs and why your particular project or goal is going to impact the field and advance it in a specific way. Benefits to one specific employer alone will usually not be enough. And the government is looking for evidence of broader impacts to a field, a region, or the public at large. So this is an example that we see in the policy manual where the government explains that a person developing a drug for a pharmaceutical company may establish national importance by demonstrating the prospective public health benefit of the drug instead of solely projecting the profits that will accrue to the employer. So what the government is not looking for is benefits of somebody's work that only inures to the particular employer or the particular business, but they want to look for, larger benefits to, advancing the field a little bit more broadly. Widespread interest in adopting or licensing a technology, a novel and important manufacturing process, or how the technology stands to impact the development of similar technology by other companies can also show the potential for a broader impact to the industry of your particular work. But remember that it needs to be very directly related to the project that you're going to be working on. Substantial economic benefit, creation of US jobs at a level significant with respect to a population or economy of a region. So we're not looking at a dozen jobs. We're really looking at a much higher number of jobs, job creation that will be significant with respect to the population of a region. If you're providing a larger scale economic benefit like that, you can also rely on that to prove national importance. All right, so thank you, Dustin. Now let's move on to some of the other topics.
Perfect. Thank you, GA. So we'll switch gears just a little bit and talk about what is included in a national interest waiver petition. And just in very broad strokes, the helpful way to think about this is to think about what GA just shared in terms of substantial merit, national importance, meeting the threshold requirements, that the applicant is well positioned, and you almost create buckets of documentation to prove to the government that you meet each of those requirements. So let's start with the first part of a national interest waiver petition, which is proof that you meet the threshold requirement. So as GA mentioned, if you are qualifying based on an advanced degree, you would include a copy of that degree, transcripts, proof that you have that met that requirement in your application. Since this is being filed with USCIS, copies of these documents is fine. You don't need to send in the original documents. If you are qualifying, though, based on exceptional ability, and remember, as GA mentioned, that's meeting 3 of the 7 criteria that she mentioned before, then you want to include proof that you meet those criteria. If we want to go back real quick to a little too far. Okay. So if we look here, this is the exceptional ability, the 7 criteria. So you see, just to pull a few examples, license to practice your profession, evidence that you've commanded a salary or other compensation that's higher than average for your title, recognition for your achievements and significant contributions to your industry or your field by your peers, government entities, etc. So what you want to do here is you want to think very broadly. This really is your opportunity to advocate for yourself. And frankly, oftentimes it's impossible for an immigration lawyer to be entirely familiar with your record. You are going to be the expert on these things. You are going to be the one to know whether you have a contact in the government who has advocated for your work, who has expressed to you, I think this is a great idea. If the Department of Energy has said you're working on a great idea, or as GA mentioned, the Department of Agriculture, or maybe you're working on a technological innovation that's received attention from NASA or another entity. So only you are likely to know that. So really think broadly about any and all evidence that you might pull together to meet several of these criteria. And just to be clear, even though we say meet 3 of the 7, it's always good to try to meet as many of the 7 as you can. So let's move back to our slide. So the next requirement is, we talked about threshold, meeting the threshold requirement. Now, proof that you qualify for the National Interest Waiver. Now, you see on your screen a long list of documentation. I, again, think about this documentation in terms of buckets. So the first bucket is going to be about your proposed endeavor. How do you prove to the government that what you're going to be doing on the National Interest Waiver, on the green card in the US, is of substantial merit and national importance? How do you prove that about the project itself? Okay, so this is going to include things like articles that have been published about, for example, your business, if that's what you're working on, or on your area of research, if that's what you're applying based on. This could also be one of the key pieces of evidence in these applications is expert letters. And usually we like to include a combination of letters from people who know you personally and your work personally. So that could be colleagues, that could be supervisors, mentors, but also people who are independent of you and your work. A key example of that would again be a government official who thinks that you are working on a great project. Just to give a few examples from cases we've worked on, that could include individuals at, for example, the Department of Energy that I mentioned before, that think that your area of research is really important for the United States. Or it could be if your endeavor is, say, a business, and you're applying as an entrepreneur, could be local politicians, your local mayor, your state senator, who represents your region, saying, hey, this person has created businesses in our region, and they have created a significant number of jobs for an economically depressed area, for example. So you want to think about both those personal reference letters as well as the more independent reference letters. You could also include, as we go down the list, your resume, your degrees, proof that you have won awards or recognition. Now this is actually getting more into the second bucket. So the first bucket that I mentioned is about the endeavor. The second bucket is that you are well positioned to push that endeavor forward. So it's helpful to think about those two as distinct. You need proof that the proposed endeavor is of substantial merit and national importance, and that you are the best person to move that endeavor forward. Okay, so for that, it is great to include your resume, your degrees, proof of your awards. Again, expert letters can and should touch on this, not just about your endeavor, but also why you are the best person to move your endeavor forward. You would also include proof of work that you've done in the endeavor, and that could be proof that you have collaborated with the government on certain initiatives, proof that your business has executed contracts with significant clients or government entities, for example. If you are working on a business, it could be proof that you've received funding from, for example, a venture capital firm or a foundation, if you're applying based on a nonprofit. So again, similar to what I was saying before, you really do want to think broadly. Um, this is not the time to be modest. This is also not the time for you to say, well, that evidence isn't good enough. Go ahead and put that evidence forward to your lawyer, and let your lawyer be the one to say, either yes, that's great to include, or you know what, I think you have better evidence, so let's leave that out. But your job as the applicant is really to think broadly about how you can prove that, first of all, if you're applying on exceptional ability, you meet those 3 of the 7 criteria. Second, that your proposed endeavor is of substantial merit and national importance. And third, that you are well positioned to move that endeavor forward. Finally, GA talked about this final piece of the national interest waiver, which is really just showing that labor certification should be waived, that this is an endeavor where your endeavor or your employer, if you are basing this on employment at a place, does not need to test the labor market. So really for that piece, oftentimes there's not a lot of additional documentation that needs to be included. What oftentimes you can do is point to those other aspects of your application. If you can show the proposed endeavor is of substantial merit and national importance and that you're well positioned, then oftentimes it follows logically that labor certification should be waived. So let's talk about some recent trends and strategies. So over the last few years, GA actually shared with our team internally some amazing statistics where the number of applications for national interest waivers has multiplied multiple times over recent years. Um, and so it does make sense that the government is looking at these applications with more scrutiny. They are denying more applications. They are also issuing more requests for evidence and harsher requests for evidence. So this, in some ways, is not surprising. Um, I don't know if we have a strong theory as to why applications are skyrocketing to the extent they are. I think part of it is probably that word of mouth that entrepreneurs are eligible probably drives some of that, as well as the visa bulletin and the availability of these green cards historically, although we will talk about the current state of that. They are not current at the present time, but we'll talk about what that means. So anyway, the takeaway for this slide is that these are becoming more competitive. That being said, we see plenty of approvals on national interest waivers. This is still very much a viable green card category, especially and really for applicants who, as GA said, can point not just to benefits they're creating for their immediate community or their immediate customers or clients, but really impacting their community, their society. One important thing that I really do want to emphasize, though, is that when you hear the expression national interest waiver, you oftentimes will assume from that, well, that means I need to impact the entire United States, and that is just not true. If you are impacting your local community in a meaningful way, even if it is creating a substantial number of jobs for an economically distressed area, that can certainly meet the requirements for a national interest waiver. So don't think that just because you're not impacting the entire United States that you're not eligible for an NIW. You may still be eligible. The third point you see is that the government has issued policy guidance really under the current administration that narrows what it considers to be in the national interest. So under the last administration, there was some helpful guidance that came out regarding artificial intelligence, machine learning, really STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math more broadly. And under this administration, we have seen some narrowing of that language. That being said, still those endeavors are viable. You just have to be a little more creative about how you frame them and advocate for them. And sometimes you can't just point to a specific publication that the White House put out, but you can oftentimes still point to other publications that point to the importance of those endeavors. So don't be the one to, say that your endeavor is not eligible. Bring it to a qualified immigration lawyer. We'd be happy to take a look and let your lawyer assess whether it's viable under the current immigration landscape. GA also talked about how the Danisar case came out in 2017, and that really was a sea change in terms of how entrepreneurs have access to the national interest waiver. It really is. Danisar is a wonderful case. for national interest waivers generally, but especially for entrepreneurs. So certain strategies that are specific to entrepreneurs, I think the first thing I would say is you want to think about kind of a two-prong approach if you're an entrepreneur. You want to think about what the benefit of your services or products are. So maybe you are changing the way, as GA talked about, changing the way that a product is manufactured. Or you're changing the recipe for bread. You're doing something very innovative with your business, with your product or your service. Okay, that's the first prong of the two prongs for entrepreneurs. The second prong is oftentimes job creation and that economic impact. So keep both of those in mind. I'm not saying you need both, but I do think that if you can point to both, in general, it makes for a stronger national interest application. That is especially true if you're applying based on job creation. You can get a national interest waiver based on creating jobs alone, but it is difficult to do. And you typically need to be creating jobs in the dozens. So we are talking about 60, 70, 80, 100 jobs created from your business. Again, if you're applying based on job creation alone. And oftentimes it's ideal if those jobs are created in socioeconomically distressed areas where there's high unemployment, for example, maybe a rural area. So the takeaway there is it is possible to win an NIW, to be approved based on job creation, but you need to have a significant number of jobs and oftentimes in an area that really does benefit from those jobs. And if you can couple that with the fact that your business is actually doing something innovative, you've increased your chances of approval. So you see on your screen some examples of evidence that you'd want to include. We already talked about a number of these, but think about expert letters from local representatives talking about your business, the impact of the jobs created, the impact of the services or products being produced by your business. Think about who in the United States, whether that's government entities, whether that's venture capital firms, can speak to the importance of your business. If you have actually signed contracts, so maybe you have proof of significant invoices, significant sales, tax returns for the business showing how successful it's been. This is all very helpful to show both that you have a great proposed endeavor, meaning your business, and you're selling a significant number of things, or what you're selling is innovative, and that you are the right person to do it. If you are the owner, again, proof of ownership is helpful to show, proof of publicity you've received as the owner of the business is very helpful. So and also those contracts, those tax returns, if you are the owner, they can be attributed to you as well, that you are the ideal person because you've led the business along on the successful track record so far. So let's talk about timing and some other considerations. In terms of timing, so there are really two parts to a national interest waiver. And again, this as GA mentioned, this is an EB2, it's an employment-based green card. So as with all green cards, there's really two parts. The first part is the I-130, I'm sorry, I-140, which is the application that goes to USCIS that is talking about basically how you qualify for you and the proposed endeavor qualify. But the second part is the actual green card application. And if you're inside the US, that's an I-485. If you're outside the US, that's a DS-260. And you'd submit that to a consulate if you're outside the US. If you're inside the US, you have the option of submitting it an I-485 to USCIS. If you're inside the US, you do have the option to consular process by filing a DS-260. So the consular option is always available whether you're inside or outside the US. The I-485 is only available if you're inside the US, and that is called adjustment of status, that I-485. So that first part, the I-140, You can pay for premium processing on that, which means that USCIS will decide your application within just a few weeks. Now, the premium processing fee is almost $3,000, so it's not cheap, but it is a fast way to get a decision on your I-140. Now, the important thing to know is that the I-140 being approved does not necessarily mean you get a green card any faster. And that is because the number of green cards that are issued each year is defined by the US Congress. And so only a certain number of green cards are made available every year. If more people apply for green cards than there are available, you get a long line of people waiting for them. And unfortunately, right now, there is a backlog in terms of the National Interest Waiver. So if we go to Google and you search Visa Bulletin, and right now we have the November Visa Bulletin, and you scroll down and you go to employment and you see employment-based second. That's what we're talking about here. You will see that right now there is about a year and a half to a 2-year delay for the second category, the EB2 category. And the EB2 category includes national interest waivers again. So what that means is basically you need to wait until that date you see on the visa bulletin as of now. As of now, people let's take an example. If we look at, let's say that you were born in Canada and you're applying for a national interest waiver. So right now you look at employment-based second, all that would put you in this first column, all chargeability areas except those listed because Canada is not China, India, Mexico, or the Philippines. So right now they're looking at 15 July 2024. And what that means is that right now there are green cards available. You can submit your green card application. If your I-140 was received on or before July 15th, 2024. So this gets pretty complicated. Schedule a consultation if you have questions about that. The takeaway here, though, is that it is taking about a year and a half to 2 years before green cards are available. That also means you cannot file your I-485 at the same time as your I-140. You do need to wait for the I-140 to be approved, and you do need to wait for your date to become current according to the visa bulletin. So there is a delay there. All right, now there's some things to keep in mind. Since there is a delay, you'll file the I-140 and you'll be waiting for that to be approved. You might have an underlying visa. You might have an E2 visa. You might have an H-1B, a student visa maybe. You need to be careful because once you file an I-140, you have signaled to the government that you are interested in a green card. So one of the conditions of having a visa, such as a student visa or an E2 visa, is that you're not pursuing a green card. You need to basically promise the government that you plan to leave at the end of your temporary visa. So how do you do that if you have a pending green card application? There are ways to improve or I should say, reduce your risk of doing this. And one of the ways is to consular process. If you let the government know, I'm not planning to adjust status in the United States, instead I plan to leave, go to a consulate, get my green card there, then it's clear to the government, more clear to the government, that you don't plan to stay in the US on your temporary visa. You don't plan to stay permanently on your temporary E2 or student visa. So applying at a consulate, doing consular processing for the national interest waiver can be a very good idea if that is your scenario. Again, this is a really complicated area, so it's good to schedule a consultation if you have any questions at all. Okay, I think that's sufficient on that. I know we have a number of questions, and I am actually going to skip the case study because the case study, you'll get this presentation by email after the presentation. So read through this. It's helpful to just show how the pieces of evidence we talked about and the qualifications that GA talked about play out in practice. So this is a good example. So a number of questions have come in. GA, did you have a chance to look at these? Is there a place you'd like to start?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the first one. So we do offer 1 hour consultations, please use the link to schedule one with one of our lawyers. We don't review any materials before the consultation, but we're happy to look at them together during the consultation. And I find it most helpful to have this organic conversation with the applicant to really, tease out what can be the most relevant and helpful evidences, forms of evidences for that can help the case. So definitely feel free to reach out to us. Let's talk about letters of reference. So expert letters, how many are typically needed for an NIW application? I would say I've seen cases where we've filed with, I guess, as few as 4 letters, but like as many as like more than 8, like 9, even more. I think it really depends on what you're trying to prove. So if you're trying to prove, many different parts of the prospective impact of your endeavor, or maybe you want to include, different different agencies or companies that are interested in working with you, like, to support national importance, maybe then, you would get 3 to 4 letters on prong one. Or maybe you want to, develop more prong two, where you really need to expand upon what your track record of success is. And by developing this record of success, maybe you want to get testimonial letters from your previous employers talking about what you've done in the past and how that has been impactful. So if you want to, develop 3 to 4 examples of that, then you want 3 to 4 letters from those particular previous partners. So yeah, it really depends on how we're building the case itself, and it also would probably depend on the case strength as well. So if there are many different objective forms of other evidence that show, the impact, then maybe you don't need as many letters to show national importance, and vice versa for well positioned. So definitely, this is a strategy point that you will decide with your lawyer. What is your scope of work for the NIW application, and what is the task of an applicant? Definitely, we can provide more detail about that in a consultation. We advise the client in every step of the way for the NIW, from document collection to, helping modify or modulate the expert letter content, deciding on the case strategy. And the applicant also does a lot of heavy lifting, because the applicant knows best what, their specific, endeavor will be, and what their previous work experience was that will support well positioned as well. So it is really a partnership that we do with the client, and the client does a lot of the work to inform us of what they do and why it's going to be impactful. And that really creates, in my opinion, an organic package that is not fake, that is not cookie cutter, and we have a very, very high approval rate, very, very high. Yeah, I can count any denials in one hand, and yeah, and so we do this because we're able to really help the client bring out the best forms of evidence that they have. That's why we're very distinct from many other companies that do large mass cookie cutter petitions. So that's something that we can definitely offer as an advantage. Legal fees will not cover here, but definitely schedule a consultation, and we'll be happy to provide you with more information. Can I apply for an NIW if I'm employed with an H-1B? Yes, the H-1B is a dual intent visa, so you're allowed to have plans for a green card, but definitely reach out to us because we may want to think about the timeline and things like that. That's something that we can explore in a consultation. Yeah, Justin, do you want to take the rest? And maybe we'll close after.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So approval of an NIW. I mean, so the first part, the I-140, can be as short as I'd say 3 weeks to a month if you pay for premium processing. That is for approval of the I-140 though. So to actually get your green card in hand, because right now the category is backlogged, again, you are looking at about a year and a half to 2 years before you actually have your green card in hand. So it does take some time. This relates actually to a later question. Is the EB1A better than the NIW? I would not use the word better. They really are two different paths, and you have to think about what path is better for you. But the reason I raised the EB1A is if you look at the visa bulletin, EB1As are current, meaning they're available right now. So the green cards are available. So if you qualify for both, it can be a good idea to go for the EB1A, especially if you're in the US and you want to file that I-485 at the same time. filing an I-485 allows you to apply for work authorization and travel authorization, which allows you to enter and exit the US freely. So that can be a strategic decision. I will just say that is something we should talk about over a consultation. We'd love to map out the different paths you can follow and if you qualify. The EB1A is more difficult to qualify for than an
We
NIW.
we've also had success on doing EB2 NIW for a client and then also filing an EB1A after
Correct.
the EB2 NIW was approved. And we've actually had some great success on those types of cases. And I do think that having the NIW approval first does provide some optics benefit in when the government officer is looking at it. So that's another strategy you can consider to actually do both. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, you can definitely have two or more green card petitions operating in parallel. And that's exactly right. We've also done EB5s. So if you
True.
have, savings, or if you're able to receive a gift or a loan that qualifies, and you want a more passive green card path, then the EB5 may be a good option as well, while your EB2 NIW is operating. So how long we've already touched on a number of these. Uh, we'd be happy to talk costs over a consultation. We have an engagement letter that details that, the cost as well as the process. We're not going to touch on it during the presentation, though. Um, all right, we answered that. What changes may be expected after January 2026? I'm not sure why January 2026 was picked. But right now, I think the changes we've seen so far since January 2025 with the new administration, we're probably going to see the same trends, which we mentioned: increased numbers of NIWs, increased requests for evidence, probably increased denial rates, although again, still very much a viable green card path. GA, this last question, I mean, so I work in marketing. I have great data for Europeans. Can I be enough for prong one? So we don't get into specific scenarios in webinars. This really is better suited for a consultation. So we can talk about: what recognition have you received? Do you have any publications? Are there any articles written about you? Do you work for a university? Have you received funding for your work? Things like that are really going to be critical there. Based on what the question has shared, you very well may qualify, but it really depends on what else you can bring to the
Yeah,
table.
we'll just need more info. Yeah, yeah.
So perfect. Well, we are at time, 11:02, my time, New York time. GA, thank you so much for taking the time. Very informative. Thank you for the wonderful questions, everyone. If you would like to follow up to schedule a consultation, keep an eye out for the email we'll send to you. We'd love to continue the conversation and answer any questions you have. In the meantime, stay well.
Thank you.